So this is the screen we're going to be creating using SwiftUI. I'll show you not only how to create a lot of these UI elements, but also how to structure and organize them a little bit better so it's more readable and maintainable in the future. And then also we're going to be creating a simple model to pass in the data from this product so it can dynamically build it out in the code as opposed to hard coding it. All right, so the first thing we're going to do is create a new SwiftUI project, right? And before we touch the view code at all, we need to add these images. We've got our lettuce and we've got our very big picture of rhubarb. So we're going to add this directly to our asset catalog, which then makes it accessible via our app bundle. And now we can call on these images and load them directly into our code, right? So we're just dragging and dropping those images there. And before we touch the UI code now, we need to press Command N to create a new Swift file. We're going to call this item. This is our produce or whatever you want to call it. This is going to be a struct item. And we're going to give it 5 properties. We're going to say let name or title. This is a string. Let description is a string. Let origin. Origin is string, and that's where it's originating from or coming from. What else do we need? Let price. This is going to be our double, and we'll convert that later to a string when we need it. What else are we missing? Our image, right? So let image is a string. We're going to be referencing it by the file title. Now, something I like to do when I am creating a new UI is I will create examples of this item so that I can more quickly create these views in Xcode specifically. So what I'll do is create an extension of my item. And now I can create a static example of that item. So we'll call this item example. And this is an item with the properties that we just stated here. We'll call this Boston lettuce. Description we'll skip for now, but we're going to say this originates from Spain with a price of $1.10. And our image name, you can see what we put in here. It's called lettuce. Right? It has to match exactly or else it won't be able to find it. So for my description, I'm just going to copy and paste this to save time. This was taken from Wikipedia, I believe. Thank you, Wikipedia editors. And I'm going to create one more example. I'll say item example 2. We'll just rename a few of these. We'll say garden rhubarb. Originates from New York with a price of $2.15 and an image of rhubarb. Right? I think I spelled that right. I'll keep the description the same. It doesn't really matter. It's just for the example of programming this. Now we're ready to start thinking about our UI code. Now this is a typical SwiftUI view. We might want to change the title of this. It's the default SwiftUI project is called Content View. Basically, all the good things happen in this this body, right? So for right now, what we're going to start with is we need to take the item that we just created and we're going to pass it into this view when we initialize it. So we'll say we'll let our item is of type item. So we're not creating this here. We're just promising we're promising this view. We will provide you with an item so that you can display the content correctly. And this is going to be a problem for us right here because we are creating this in our preview and we did not provide the item that we promised. So we're just, for the example of this preview, we're going to be adding this manually, our item example 1, which is our lettuce. Right, so now we have a lot more information. We have the title because we passed it in. We have the image and stuff like that. And we're ready to get started building some of these elements. Now, the first thing we'll do is we'll take a look at our screen and we'll see what is the screen made up of. There's 2 really big elements. We've got our background image here, and then we've got our our content, right? We've got the title, the price, description, buttons, stuff like that. And this is all contained within a box layered on top of that background image, right? So I'm going to split it up into two main sections, the image and then the content itself. So we'll get started with the background view. You could do all of this in the body, but it gets complicated. It gets hard to read. So I'm going to be separating this out into their own calculated properties, very similar to the body. But this is just going to make it a lot easier for us to get right. And, it just gets really confusing with v stacks and h stacks everywhere. So like the body, we're going to call this var background view or background image. And this is of type sum view, right? We can call an image here, and we're going to use the image string from our item. So we'll say item.image. And now because we're passing in our lettuce here, it should be able to populate our item. This is not going to work though because our body still has this, the template. But now we can say background image, which is calling on this calculated property, and it should hopefully show us our image if we spelled everything right, or we've got an error here. That error is because we've created this view here and did not provide it with the item that we promised we would provide it. So we should have what we need, right? Yeah, so there is our lettuce. Couple things that's wrong with this that might not be really obvious, but I'm gonna draw a border around it. This is something I like to do a lot. You'll see on the bottom and the top, you can't really see it on the top, but there's a red border around this. You don't see it on the sides, which means that this is technically spilling out over the sides of the screen. So for the sake of it, we're going to constrain this image a little bit, make sure that it stops at the corners or at the edges of the screen, and that'll help us when we go to align it alongside the content. So to be able to resize this content, we need to add the modifier to it called resizable, and this is going to try to fill the screen now with as much space as it can, and now that's a good opportunity for us to constrain it. So we're going to maintain our aspect ratio by saying scale to fill. So this will keep the same height and width, but now it'll keep the aspect ratio correct. And we can use frame to constrain it to, the borders of the screen itself. So we're going to add a frame. Start with width. So sometimes you could use, there's something called Geometry Reader, which can read the values inside the view itself. We don't really need that here. We can use something called UI screen.main.bounds.width. So this is basically giving us a CG float, which is just basically a double of the measurement of our screen, no matter what type of iPhone we're using. This will be, it'll display the size of the screen on any type of screen, I guess is what I'm trying to say. So this is going to constrain it to exactly how wide our screen is. And we're also, because this is about 50% of our screen, we're also going to add one for heights. So we'll say UI screen.main.bounds.height. And we don't want it to take up the whole screen. We want it to take up half. So we'll say divided by 2, or you could multiply it by 0.5. So now we've got this red border all the way around. This is sized correctly, and we're going to delete this border, and we'll get to doing some of the alignment with that other content in a second once we make it. So I'm going to close this background image up, and I'm going to create some of these elements. You can see, if you can kind of visualize like the sections here, we've got like this is its own section, and then the origin, the description is its own section, and then the buttons. So it's like 3 different sections here, all placed inside this box and then layered on top of the image. So it gets a little confusing. Just that's why you want that organization as much as you can. It'll just prevent like weird sizing things. It can be tough with SwiftUI too to like know exactly what's happening and why. So let's get started with our title and our price. So say var, we're going to call this our content header. This is again of some view, and we're going to be using our using text for our item dot what do we call this, name. Right? We won't be able to see this because in the body we're calling on our background image, but now if we say content header, we should see on the screen our Boston lettuce. Okay, so we've got our title there. I'm going to give this a font of, I think I called this title, and we're going to give this is a shortcut you can do. Instead of adding a font weight down here, you can call bold directly onto the title as an additional modifier. We've got our title here, but I made a mistake because this and this need to go together. So if you want to think about it like this, this is vertically stacked on top of this, and then the price and the unit is actually two different text elements. So that's going to be a horizontal stack here inside of a vertical stack here. Okay, so we're going to say a vstack, and we're going to copy and paste this inside here. And now we need our h stack. So we've got our vertical stack and then our horizontal stack. And we have our price, right? Our price. So really, this is what we want to show. $110. This is just hard coded, so I typed it in manually. But for our item, we have a double. So we can't use that directly in the text. We need to convert it to a string so that SwiftUI can read it as a string and display it on screen. So to do this, we're going to do a little bit of Swift stuff. We're going to use, okay, here's what it's called. Text. We're going to say, we'll do this. We'll say $. Now we're going to use string interpolation, right? We're going to call string, and then we're going to convert our, basically we're going to say item.price. Let's see if that works. So this is converting our price into a string, string interpolation with a $. It gets a little messy. But we've converted this, but now it says $1.1. We actually want two places after the decimal. So instead of doing that, we're also going to add like a format to it. It gets a little complicated. Don't feel like you need to memorize this. This is something that's really easy to Google if you forget, and it's hard to remember, so I wouldn't worry about it. But we can say format. Whoops. We'll say format, and this we're going to place a string in here called %, period, to F. So it's format first, then our item price. It's formatting our double as a string, two places after the decimal point with the $sign next to it. Again, it's confusing, so don't feel like, it might take you some time. It's okay. Ask ChatGPT. And now in our H stack, we also have our unit. So we're going to add another text field. We're just going to hard code this one. We'll say /EA for each. And we're going to add a foreground style of secondary for this to make it gray. And then let's see, did we do this right? This needs to be larger and bold. So we'll say font for this, title 2.bold. And then one last thing, this needs to be aligned on the left or the leading side, depending on wherever you're accessing this screen. So we can say in this vstack here, alignment dot leading. This will align it to the left side if you're in a Western country, or to the right side if you're elsewhere in the world. And there we go. There's our section. It looks pretty good. I might say like this could be like a little smaller. Cool. So there's our section. I'm going to fold this screen. It's Option Command left arrow. a little shortcut tip for you. Or if you want, you can press Option Command Shift to the right or to the left to fold anything on the view, which is very, very helpful. So instead of, well, let's get to the next part. I'm going to get rid of that. Well, okay. I'll say var content description. That's the next section we're going to be working on, is of type SumView. And for this, we've got our origin and our description. So we need a VStack for that to align it vertically. I'll say text item dot origin and then text item dot description. And we should be good. This will not show it on screen because we have our content header visible. I'll say content description. And we'll see what we're working with. Again, this is what we want it to look like. We'll align this alignment to the left. Okay, this needs a little bit more spacing, so we'll add spacing 10 and see how that looks. So that looks pretty good. This needs to be a bit larger, so we'll say font of maybe title 3. We'll bold it as well. And then this text should be a foreground color of secondary. Should look pretty good. So you'll notice, there's padding here on the screen. And there's not padding here. We're not going to worry about that right now. We're just going to add in the content here where we have it, and then we're going to apply a single padding layer or padding modifier on top of the entire content. That way it just, we don't have to have it in multiple places, right? So that looks good. We're going to keep that for now. The last thing is our buttons. And so we'll do another one. Our content, what was I spelling? Content, buttons, SumView. Now, if we look at our buttons, we've got this little heart-shaped one and then our add to cart. So this is a horizontal stack that we're going to be using, H stack, and we're going to be using rounded rectangles to draw these, and we're going to add an overlay on top of it. So there's a couple ways you could skin it, just, it's whatever you prefer. I'm just going to be using the shape and then the overlay on top of the button. So we'll call this a rounded rectangle for our first one with a corner radius of 10. And we'll get rid of this, say content buttons, we'll call it buttons. And let's see if we can visualize this on screen. Okay, so this is going to try to fill up the screen as much as it can. So we are going to add some modifiers on this so it's not this big black box. We'll say instead of filling this, we're going to say give it a stroke border. Border of secondary to match our secondary text. And then we're going to give this a line width of 1. So this is going to look like this. We're also going to constrain the frame size because we don't want it to fill up that much. We'll say frame with a width of 70 and a height of 50. Right, so that looks a lot more what it should be with our rounded rectangles there. And then lastly, we're going to add an overlay with a trailing closure here. And this overlay is a SF symbol. We're going to call the system name of heart. This is going to draw it directly in the middle. We could even add a foreground color of secondary to match the stroke. And then we can actually change the size too. We can say font of subheadline. Right, so there's our image. We're going to draw the next one. So we'll say rounded rectangle again, corner radius matching this one, so 10. In this one, instead of doing a stroke, we're doing a fill with green color. And we need to constrain the size again. So we'll say frame, heights of 50. Now I'm going to tell you why I'm doing it like this. There is a height and width on this one. Because it's smaller, we just want to say, okay, this is how big it should be, exactly. Now with this one, we want to set the height to be the same height, but the width doesn't really matter too much because we're going to basically saying, fill out the rest of the space, right? And that way, if we don't constrain the height or the width, it'll just fill out as much space as it can, okay? So we're going to add an overlay to this as well. Overlay. We're going to say this is, let's take a look. So this is an image here and then text, add to cart. So we're going to say hstack for that. Hstack. We've got our image of system name. I believe it's just called a cart. Font, subheadline of bold. And we're going to make this white. And now next to it, we're going to add text saying add to, all caps, add to cart. We're going to match these modifiers here so it's similar. And I think that's pretty much it for the buttons. Again, there's no padding on this. This is what it will look like, but we're going to apply all of this, all together at one time. So that is our 3 sections. We've got our header, description, and buttons. And we're going to add one more section here. We'll say var content some view. And this is where we're going to compile all of those elements together. So we're going to say this is a VStack of all 3 elements, content header, content description, and our content buttons. We're going to get rid of this and say, cool, this is our content. And we'll see what we've got. Cool, so there's our elements. Some more work we need to do with this. We need to work on the alignment to make sure they're all aligned on the leading side, and some spacing as well. Maybe spacing of 40. That looks pretty good. And lastly, we need some padding. So there you go. That looks pretty good. Cool. So now we can start working on placing our background image and the content together. So anytime you have layering like this, you're going to want to use something called a Z-stack. So it's basically, there's got H-stack, V-stack. Z-stack basically means they can be aligned on top of each other in a, 3D space or whatever you want to call it. So we're going to say, instead of content, we'll say Z-stack in our body. The first element is what's going to be in the foreground, in the background. So we're going to say our background image, which is drawing this calculated property that we created earlier. And then after that, we're going to add our content, right? So this should be drawn on top. Now, this doesn't look good right now because there's a few things wrong. We need to add a background to our content. So we'll say, go back to our content. We're going to also draw a background for this. Background. And we're going to call this color.white. We'll see what it looks like. Okay. And what we need to do is kind of push this view to the bottom. There's probably other ways to do this. I'm just going to do this for now. This is a VStack. And we're going to place a spacer to push. Basically, it's going to occupy this entire screen. We're going to push this bottom content view all the way down to the bottom. And now to push this background all the way to the top, we're going to say alignment. Alignment to the top. So that'll push the image to the top and the content to the bottom. Overlay it a little bit. You'll remember here from this, we've got these, this kind of like this mask over this background image. So we'll add that next. And then you can see how it's stacked on top of each other. So we're going to add that in the background of our content by doing a clip shape. And this is going to be a rectangle that we're going to be drawing. And we're going to do, basically all we need is the top trailing and the top leading. So we'll say top leading of 30. and top trailing 30. So basically drawing, you know, we're getting rid of these corners so that the image layer can be seen through it, if that makes sense. All right, so that's good so far. It looks a lot better. We need to get rid of this. This is called the safe area. So we need to basically ignore that safe area so that image can occupy that space and fill out the rest of that screen. We'll add it here. We'll say, you could say ignore all safe areas, but we'll just say edges, ignore safe area, top. And now that image will fill up that screen. Got another problem in that this needs a bit more space. We just added kind of like all around padding, but we need the vertical, the leading and the trailing look fine, but the vertical needs a little bit more space. So we'll say, instead of equal padding everywhere, we'll say edge inserts, and this will give us manual control over every single area of the padding. So we'll say top, we'll give you pretty aggressive padding here. Let's call it maybe 40. Leading and trailing, we'll give it 15. And then bottom will also give you 40. So let's see what that looks like. So now you'll see the padding is right here for the top and the bottom, and the trailing to the side. So I think that's pretty much it. Now we can also say, we did pass in our Boston lettuce first. In our preview here, now we can change this to our rhubarb, and you'll see that it's changing dynamically as we change the item that gets passed in. Right? So it looks pretty cool. So that's pretty much it. Thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you learned something, and I really appreciate you watching. So thank you. Bye.